All right, so real-time strategy. Basically imagine StarCraft or Warcraft is the basic idea. The buildings themselves are actually basically the tower defense game. So if you don't remember that, go look at the GameMaker 1 videos on the tower defense game. But it's a similar idea to that. And then when you have a particular building selected, you can create units from that. The tricky part is the units themselves. So in particular, selecting and moving units is the trickiest part. For example, these two red dots are my units, these are my resource, and then this fire thing is my base. Now, in most of these games, the way you select units is you actually draw a box, like so. And then anything within that box gets selected. And then you right-click to move it. So if I select both of these units and I tell them to move, they should move to that point. Another thing you can do is you can, in this case, these two guys are basically representing workers that go collect resource and bring it back to the base. So when I right-click on the resource, the unit moves to it and collects it. And then the score right now is my actual resource that I'm using. So I can use that later on to actually create more buildings, more units, whatever it is. This is a lot of coding for this stuff here. So going into it. The first thing I've done is that I've created a parent unit, and it has a couple variables in it. Selected, which stands for whether or not it's currently selected, so basically whether it turns green or red. NX and NY is a destination point, so a point I'm trying to get to. So when I right-click, I set the destination point to be wherever I've clicked, and all the units that have that are going to try and go to that point. The step event is basically, if you're more than 10 pixels away from your destination point, try moving towards it, using potential step. This is motion planning, by the way, so it tries to go around objects. All right, I created a quick diagram here that shows how this particular unit moves. This is called a state diagram. Sometimes it's called a finite state automata. So the basic idea is this is a diagram of all the movements that this thing's going to have. And I'm actually using a variable to keep track of which state I'm in. So if I'm in state 0, that means I'm not moving currently. And then there's a couple things I could do. I could right-click with no target, so I'm not right-clicking on a resource. And in that case, you become state 1 and you move towards that point. If you reach that destination, you move back to state 0 and stop moving. Now, if I right-clicked on a target, so a resource, I'm going to go from no movement to go to that particular target. If for some reason the target was destroyed when I get there, then I just go back to stop moving. So it's possible some other worker got there and collected the last of the resource, for example. Or some enemies destroyed it, or whatever it is you're going to do in your game. So once I get to my target, I collect my resource. I believe I use an alarm for that, so it sits there for a moment and does that. After that, it goes to my base. I'm assuming there's only one base in this game. Once I'm done going back to my base, I add to my score, and then either the target's destroyed and I go back to no movement, or there's a target that still exists and I go to that target, and basically repeat this process over and over again until I collect all the resources or win or lose. So this is a way to basically plan out all the possible things that my worker is going to have. If you had like some kind of attacking unit, it would be a similar sort of thing, only you'd go to a target, and if you're within range, you attack that target, for example. And then if no target exists, maybe you go back to no movement, or you go find the next nearest one, so on. So this state diagram is a way of basically planning artificial intelligence. It's just that I have particular states that I'm in. And I basically say, what is the transition from this state to this other state? And those are the if statements I'm going to have. If this trigger happens, change myself to this other state and change my behavior. So when you're planning this, that's the idea. When you're actually coding it, it looks more like this. So I'm just saying the event inherited, which has to do with movement. If I'm selected, I set which sprite I'm at. If I'm not selected, I'm not selected. If my state variable is a 1, so I'm in that first state, and the number of targets is greater than 0, if I'm close to it, I become state 2, set my alarm to 60, and my point doesn't move anymore. Otherwise, I have no target, and I set my state back to 0. If I'm in state 3, which is I'm going to my base, if the distance to the nearest base is less than 20, score, and then check to see if there's another target. If there isn't, then I just reset my state back to 0. If I'm collecting currently, if my state is 2, then I go back to my base. Otherwise, if my base doesn't exist for whatever reason, I stop. So that's all stuff that happens in my unit. The diamond, all it has a variable that keeps track of how much it's got. When you right-click on it, you tell all the selected units, hey, this is the ID of the target you want to go to. And by the way, here's the X and Y where that is, and you're now in state 1. So this is setting up the unit to actually go towards this particular resource. I'm also drawing the amount that this particular object has next to its sprite. The base doesn't have anything right now. It's just being used as a placeholder for trying to get to something. Eventually this guy might have health or something like that. The selection controller. This is the thing that actually draws the box and selects all units. So it has a start X and Y, which is used for when you left press on a spot on the map. That's the corner of the box where you're going to draw. Also, it keeps track of whether or not the mouse is down, because if the mouse is up, you don't need to draw that box. So when I left press, I set, hey, this X and Y position is the mouse X and Y, and the mouse is currently down. So that when I'm in the draw event, if the mouse is down, it just draws a rectangle. That's how it draws it. It draws it from the initial X and Y to where the mouse currently is. When I left release, it goes through every unit and deselects them. And then it goes through each unit and checks to see, are they between the left and right side of the box? That's what these are doing, is if my X is greater than the smaller of the X and the mouse X, and is it less than the larger of the X and the mouse X, and then the same with the Y, then I should be selected. So I'm basically going, am I within the box? Is my X and Y position within the box? If I am, I'm selected. When I right press, I go through each unit, and if you are a selected unit, you have a new point you're trying to go to. Congratulations, move towards that point. So the selection controller is the thing that actually controls movement, and it's basically going through all the units and saying, are you selected? If you are, go to this point. And then the units themselves actually decide to move towards that point once they are assigned a place to go. All right, it's a little complicated, I got to admit, but that's the unit portion of it. If you can handle that, you can handle most of the rest of it. The towers themselves are going to be just like the tower, or the buildings are just like the tower defense. You have a place where you can select a building, you can place it, assuming you have enough of your resource, whatever it is. Your units that are more the attack units would have a similar diagram to this. The only difference would be they'd have an attack state instead of like going to base and collecting resources. And eventually you're going to have some sort of health probably on the enemy base, on your base. Maybe you could do it on buildings. It's up to you how you do that. All right, that should be enough to get you going. This thing is out in the README.